Hi, welcome to Please Excuse My OCD. My name is Tyler Falcoa and I am your host. Today, I wanted to just jump right in and talk about contamination OCD. Really, what is it and how it's played a role in my life through my experience? And hopefully this can help you feel less alone if you're struggling with contamination OCD. Also, if you love somebody who has struggled with contamination OCD, I hope that this can give you a little bit of relief knowing that they are not alone. Every week, I've been doing this for 6 weeks. This is going to be the 7th. And just to see the outpouring love and support from people, friends, family, strangers across the board has been truly incredible. And I just want to take this second just to thank anybody who's listened so far and has found some sort of connection and community here, because that's exactly what I'm trying to do, is to build a podcast, to be as open as possible. Sometimes I feel like I'm too open, but I digress. And also to help people feel less alone, because I felt completely isolated and alone with my OCD growing up, and I just don't think it needs to be like that for anybody. Disclaimer, I am not a medical professional. I am simply someone who has lived with OCD for most of his life, if not all of it, and I'm here to share my experience with you. As always, if you are struggling, please seek advice from a medically trained professional. So let's get right into it. What is contamination OCD? Contamination OCD is a subtype of OCD that includes the excessive fear of being contaminated by dirt, germs, or pretty much any other substance out there, in fear of becoming ill or coming across harm, or even putting illness and harm onto others. This can greatly affect anyone's daily life who has it. I know it did for me for most of my life. It's something that I still work through from day to day, but it's not something that has a strong hold on me like it did when I was a kid. So what are the characteristics of contamination OCD? This can be pretty general for most subtypes of OCD, but I'll go through them again just so that we're aware of what we're talking about here. Obsessions: persistent, unwanted, intrusive thoughts, images, or impulses surrounding contamination. For example, worrying about excessive germs on a surface or chemicals on a surface that could lead to illness or harm. Compulsions are repetitive behaviors. These could be mental or physical that the person feels driven to act out on in response to their unwanted thoughts. So, for example, in our context of contamination OCD, these compulsions could include like frequent hand washing, showering, cleaning surfaces, doing everything they can to minimize the thought that they may have just been exposed to an illness, or they're trying to avoid being exposed to an illness or some type of harm. And of course, an immense amount of anxiety and distress. So just like many of the other subtypes of OCD, we have obsessions, compulsions, and a crazy amount of anxiety and distress. There is, of course, the difference between emotional contamination and physical contamination, and I'll explain just briefly what that is. But today, we're just going to be going into physical contamination. Physical contamination is much more recognized than emotional contamination. Physical contamination, like I said, has to do with literally thinking they're going to be contaminated by touching a certain object, or being around a certain person, or being in the realm of something that could get them sick or cause them harm. It could also have to do with the person who has OCD themselves getting other people sick and causing other people harm because they don't want that. Emotional contamination is less understood than physical contamination. So people who are suffering from emotional contamination may have the fear of being contaminated by certain people or environments, but the contamination doesn't really have to do with the physical being of these people or environments. This is more so in the realm where they feel being around certain people or environments may automatically transfer certain qualities of those people and of those environments onto them. So if they are disgusted with someone who has performed an action that they know about, or know that somebody has done a bad thing In their eyes, the sufferer may do everything they can to avoid that person or act out a compulsion like showering to get rid of that disgusting feeling of being around that person. This could include adopting negative traits, attitudes, or emotions from that person or environment. I feel like I have been through both, but physical contamination is something that has really been a common theme for me throughout my life. And I'll go more into detail about why that is and kind of how that manifested and also how it's changed for me throughout my life. But on the first episode, I talked about kind of how OCD manifested in my life. I didn't go into detail. I did say that, and for those of you who are listening to this episode for the first time, you can check out episode 1 where I go into more of a generalized sense of how everything happened for me. I essentially got injured in a football scrimmage with my own team. My bicep got cut open 115 stitches later. I leave the hospital, little 10-year-old kid with his bicep all stitched back up, which ended up leading to the fact that I now had this wound with a bunch of stitches in it, and I was told to take the gauze off after a few days and let the air kind of seep in and heal it. And at the time, we had a little Pomeranian dog. I was absolutely terrified that the germs from the dog would get into my wound. I began to avoid getting close to the dog. I would kind of hold my bicep and kind of cover up the wound. I was also afraid that the dog would play and by accident would like rip open the wound again. So I had like all these fears running through my head. It became this thing where I was like avoiding my little buddy. Like this dog that I loved so much, I then started to try to avoid him because I was just so terrified of something illness related happening to myself again. And this also was around the time where I've talked about this before, where I started to become afraid of going out to eat. So you can start to see that every little intrusive thought that I was having, I didn't recognize that these were just thoughts. I started to get involved with them. I started seeing them as things to solve rather than to just accept or work through. I didn't have the proper guidance then. I didn't have a therapist who was trained in OCD. We didn't know these things. So I was having all these thoughts. Of course, naturally, as a young child, I was working my way through them by avoiding, which is the last thing you want to do. So this contamination OCD that started to seep its way into my life became so overbearing to the point where, well, first it starts with the dog getting too close to my arm. Then it moves to going out to eat and being afraid to eat out. And if you actually were to ask me back then why I was afraid to eat out, the thought was, well, what if I get sick by eating meat that's undercooked? Or, I can't trust the meat that's being served to me. Like, I don't know if it's truly cooked or not. And I don't really know where that fear came from, but I just know that I had an excessive amount of anxiety surrounding eating out. And I never really had that prior. I also remember this taking a strong hold on me in middle school and high school because I kid you not, I was probably the only kid who would wash his hands prior to lunch. I mean, if anybody from my middle school or high school is watching this or listening to this right now, like, did you wash your hands? I don't know. If you did, let me know, because I felt like I was the only one who was going to the bathroom to wash his hands before lunch. And I did this every day. Every day before lunch, I'm in the bathroom washing my hands. Every day before lunch in high school, in the bathroom washing my hands. And then I made sure that when I was in line to go pick up lunch, if I didn't bring my lunch, I would make sure that I didn't touch anything with a certain hand. So if I washed both my hands and I still had to go in line and pay, I would make sure that I would touch the keypad with my right hand and the tray with my right hand, touch the keypad, and then move along and eat with my left hand. I did that because I didn't want to bring my food back to the table and then go wash my hands, because I didn't know if there was anybody who would have my back. and watch my food while I was in the bathroom. I felt like I was literally tied behind my back throughout middle school and high school because I knew that I had to wash my hands. And at the times where I'd go to the bathroom and there was no more soap, I'd go find the janitor and be like, yo, need more soap. And in the meantime, I would, use the hand sanitizer because I was like, okay, I just tried touching the soap machine in the bathroom and there was no soap in there. So that means there's definitely shit particles on there because after kids take a shit, they're washing their hands, hopefully. So that's how my brain worked. And it was like every little thing is contaminated with germs and I can't risk touching those things and then putting food in my mouth with the same hands. That was tough for me because I also was embarrassed because I was like, well, maybe people think I'm like a prude or something. Like if they see me going to the bathroom every single time before lunch, they must think there's something wrong with me. They may judge me for like wanting to be clean. I doubt people noticed me. I doubt people were like, oh, he's going to the bathroom again. Like that was just me in my head. But it was a really awkward and weird thing for me because I had this OCD brain that nobody really knew about in my social life. We barely knew much about it, but I was acting out these compulsions to avoid the uncomfortable feeling of, I feel like I'm disgusting. I feel like I'm so dirty. And if I eat my food with these hands, I could get sick. I still do from time to time. Something that I wrestled with for a while and still do is emetophobia. And emetophobia is being scared of vomiting or really anything vomiting related. I feel like I've always been like that, but I went quite a long time without vomiting until I was in college. But when I was in college, I had the norovirus and there was like a few other people that got sick in my class. The reminder of what that's like. The norovirus, for anybody who doesn't understand, is a stomach bug. It could come out of one end, it could come out of both. Nobody really knows. At that point, I think I was 19 years old. That was right around the time where I was having like that nervous breakdown that I had talked about in the first episode. That was like, it broke free all the memories of when I was sick as a child. I took a lorazepam. I took some pill before I actually yacked because I was so scared that I was going to yak. And, and I was like pacing the room and I was like, oh God, like, no. Yeah. Spray painted the bathroom. Sorry if that's too much information, but we don't hold back here. That ended up kind of resurfacing everything for me. The fear of getting sick again, going out to eat, vomiting, all that stuff. Just rehashed everything right to the front. And so now I was thinking at that point, oh no, like, did I touch a table at school that like got me sick? Like, because the other kids at school, they got sick too. So I'm thinking, was somebody in my group, did they have it and not say that they were sick? Like, did they have it and not even know they had it? Like, so all these things are going through my mind and I'm like, how do I avoid this next time? Which is really hard. It's hard to live in that fear because there's no real way for you to know where you got it. And there's really no real way to know how you got it. And at this point, like I've always been like a clean person. I was always washing my hands before I ate. So I don't know what that was about. So something for me that I do and sometimes still do is I avoid people who have had the stomach bug for a certain amount of time. And it's that assurance that the OCD brain needs to continue that cycle of, oh, okay, like they definitely don't have it, so I can go see them now. Whereas like a day or two after they have it, you're still like, are you good? Like, are you still shedding? Like, there's really no way, even if they feel better, it's like, do they still have like particles in them that could get me sick? It's like a really hard cycle to stay stuck in. And I'm guilty of this. Like I'm guilty of avoiding people. And this was one of the big fears that I would think about when it comes to living with a partner. It's like, oh, if they get sick, like I can't run. What am I going to do? Go to my mom's house? What's that about? And like, how can I also make sure that I'm a good partner when my partner's sick and I don't make it worse for them? So these are things that I've always kind of thought about in the back of my mind because I knew how bad my anxiety was when it came to vomiting and illness. Another compulsion or avoidance that I would partake in would be wherever I parked my car, I would try to park in a place that I was sure nobody vomited in. And sometimes I still do this. Like I'll catch myself where I'll be driving into a parking lot and like my worst like anxiety is parking somewhere, opening the door and realizing there's vomit next to my door. Because the last thing I want to do is inhale that or like see it or smell it. And then I'll think, oh my God, like I'm contaminated. It's in my system now. So I would avoid crowded places in parking lots, specifically in hopes that I wouldn't park in a spot that had vomit near it. I know it's like, for someone who's like normal, quote unquote, listening to this, they're probably like, what the fuck is up with this dude? Whatever subtype of OCD you have, whether it's contamination, harm OCD, whatever it is, to the person suffering, that is the worst problem in the world. The brain is built to survive. The brain wants to survive and avoid discomfort. The brain wants to make sure that it's going to be okay. So the natural occurrence for somebody who doesn't know how to deal with OCD but has it is to avoid. It's tough. It's something that I've struggled with my whole life and still do. I think it was the week of Thanksgiving, my friends from Canada came down and we were walking downtown past the restaurant that we went to because we did like a full circle walk. And like we walked past this woman who was yakking on the side of us and her husband was like patting her on the back and didn't realize that she had yacked until I looked back because I was like, oh, that's kind of odd. Like this girl looks like she's in distress. And I looked back and there was just a puddle of vomit that we just walked past. And when I saw that, I immediately held my breath. I was like, I'm not going to breathe this in. And once we were like a good 60 feet down the road, I started breathing again. But it sounds like, I can't believe I'm saying this out loud. It sounds like it could be part of like a comic strip, but it's true. Like that's how I've lived my life for a long time. I'm much better now than where I was, because at that point I recognized, I was like, okay, like you just automatically held your breath for this long. Go home. Any other day I would have showered. I didn't shower. I just got into sweatpants and brushed my teeth, washed my face, and went to bed. If that was Tyler like a few years ago, he would have gone the 10 extra miles or calling people and being like, hey, like this is just what happened. Like I just walked past this girl yakking. Am I good? But I was proud of myself for not following through on those things. It's the realization and being able to recognize, oh, I just compulsed. Oh, I just did something to avoid again. So we're on the right path here. One of the big things I think for me with eating out when it comes to contamination OCD is thinking about the fact that I don't have answers on how my food was prepped, who's prepping it, where the food, there's so many variables that a person with contamination OCD may think about. And I'm using myself as an example because I know what this is like about going out to eat that I've had to overcome is those thoughts of who's making my food, how are they prepping it? Chefs have to take a piss or maybe they have to take a shit. They go to the bathroom. Did they wash their hands? If they wash their hands, did they open the bathroom door barehanded or did they use paper towel to open the door like I do? This is where my mind would go every single time that I would go out to eat. And that's crippling. I mean, to be a kid, and this is something that I've dealt with my whole life. I've gotten much better in the past few years, but to do something that is so regular that everyone else does, but is so monumental for me every single time I do it is exhausting. How do I work with that? I have to go and continue to go out to eat because I truly love it. I love going out to eat. I love eating food, but I don't try to answer those questions anymore because I won't. There is no certainty when going out to eat. You don't know who's handling your food unless you know the guy who's working back there. You don't know who he's been with. You don't know if he's carrying a disease. You don't know if he washes his hands after he shits. I sure fucking hope he does, but you don't know. And so you have to be okay with the uncertainty of, well, whatever happens, happens, and go out anyway and go out and get the food. Like, I've had to work through that and work through that and work through that time and time again. And that has been, I guess that really is an ERP, like, an exposure response prevention, like we've talked about in other episodes. That really has been my ERP. I've told you before, I have never been a part of ERP with a professional, and I 1,000,000% do not recommend doing it on your own. Do not do what I have done. Work with a professional because it is challenging. It is very hard. And it can backfire on you if not done correctly. And so that was basically my ERP, continuing to go out to eat, continuing to order the things I wanted. It's so different for everybody. It's not always food for some people. It's surfaces, it's diseases. It could be food. It could be how, like, I have a friend who has contamination OCD about what's in the food, not so much how it was prepped or who prepped it or how's it going to make him feel later. It's what's in the food, and is that going to give me cancer? Even if he has it once, it's enough to set off a chain reaction of intense anxiety. So it's different for everybody, but for every person who experiences contamination OCD, it's the worst thing in the world to them. I've talked a little bit about growing up religious. I grew up Catholic, and I'm sure that I have listeners and followers here who are Catholic and religious, and there's nothing wrong with that. But for me, I found out religion didn't work for me a little bit later on in life. And I had religious OCD that I'll talk about another time. But one of the things that I could not stand about growing up and going to church was walking into church, we would have the blessed water that everybody dips their hands in and then proceeds to touch their face with it. And so for me, being 11 years old, seeing that was the fucking most disgusting thing I've ever seen. I felt like an alien. I was like, am I the only one that thinks this is fucking gross? Like, everyone is dipping their hands in this holy water that the priest blessed. It's a little dish dedicated for people's hands so that they can touch themselves on the face. Like, that is disgusting. I'm sorry, but I will not partake in that. So there were times where I would avoid touching that bowl because I was like, there ain't no way in hell I'm touching that piss water and then touching my face. You guys can, but I won't. And I'm pretty sure, like, during COVID, they stopped doing that for a while because people were like, yeah, that's kind of gross. And I don't know if they continued it because I no longer go to church, but that was a huge contamination thing for me. And I was deadly afraid of going to church and touching this bowl. And if I did touch it, I wouldn't actually touch my forehead. I would just be like, yep. And then I would go to the bathroom and wash my hands. I know that was a contamination thing for me. It still is disgusting. So I maybe should have done it and actually did the full thing and didn't avoid it. And maybe that would have helped me a bit. But at the same time, I'm kind of happy I didn't, because, like, who fucking knows what was in that water? So recently, how have I been working with my contamination OCD? Well, I don't wash my hands as much. Before, like, I would wash my hands after touching the computer to work and then go eat whatever I wanted to. I do wash my hands before dinner, like before the big meals I do. After I work on a session on a computer, I'll just go downstairs and have a snack. And instead of washing my hands, I'll just go right for the snack. So I've had to kind of expose myself and do that more often. Meeting up with people who just got over a cold or an illness, not waiting 2 weeks. So I've had to kind of pull back on that and start slow. So I'll be like, I'll meet up with them like a week after they got better. Next time somebody gets sick, I'll see them, a couple days after. So, like, weaning myself off of the whole 2 weeks thing has been helpful for me. Getting back to the gym and going 4 to 5 days a week has been extremely helpful for me. After the gym, I just like to clean my phone, but that's pretty much it. That's kind of been a brief history on, like, my contamination OCD. And like I said, it really has much to do with illness and emetophobia. That's kind of been a reoccurring theme for my life. It got really bad in college, and now being 29 years old and learning all these things and working on these things, I've been able to pinpoint what I need to do when I need to do it. It's proved to be helpful. Questions. This comes from Haley, and she submitted a question on my website. And she asks, "Hey Tyler, thanks so much for this podcast. It helps make me feel more understood and less alone in the OCD struggle. A question in follow-up to you telling your OCD/medication journey. is how is Effexor working for you, specifically related to intrusive thoughts? I was prescribed it by my psych, and of course, am very anxious about taking it because of the countless horror stories about it. Thanks so much for your time and sharing your story. Haley, thank you for submitting that question. I share your sentiment in being afraid and anxious to take a new medication. I've done it quite a few times, and there is so much anxiety revolving around taking a medication you've never taken before, because we never can fully give ourselves the assurance that it's going to be fully okay, because we don't know. We don't know how our body is going to react to it. We can give some certainty with the technology we have today and, giving the doctor your history and things like that. It's really hard to know for certain how a drug is going to affect you. My experience with Effexor has been personally extremely positive. I have been on Effexor for, I want to say 5 or 6 years in between that window. I was on Paxil before, as I said, I was having a lot of issues with Paxil, and Effexor was I started taking it and I didn't really have any transition effects. I didn't really have any withdrawals from Paxil. I kind of just segued really nicely into it, but I wasn't having anything serious or alarming happening to me. The intrusive thoughts specifically, which is what you were asking about, I think everybody still has intrusive thoughts. I still get intrusive thoughts from time to time, but they do not affect me the way I was affected before I was on medication. I still have intrusive thoughts, but I'm able to let go of them easier than I was able to before. And this is why, for me, therapy is so important, is because I can still work through things. I can still expose myself on certain levels and recognize when something is an intrusive thought and what I can do about it, or also what I can't do about it as well. I know some people will have worse intrusive thoughts on getting on a medication. For me, it wasn't like that. I would be really curious to hear about this transition for you and to kind of hear about how it's been for you if you do decide to move forward with it. Continue to stay in touch with your psych and also make sure they know what's going on in terms of, how this medicine is affecting you. Thank you so much, everyone who has joined me today, for coming on here and hanging out with me, listening to me ramble about OCD. Please submit a question on my website, www.pleaseexcusemyocd.com. And on my website, you can see Ask Me a Question as a tab. You can put your name, you can put no name, you can put a fake name, and ask your question, and I can answer it on next week's episode. If you think that anyone in your life could benefit from listening to this podcast, please send this to them. My whole goal here is to create a community that feels they can be open and also makes them feel they are not alone in struggling with OCD, because I felt like that for so long and I am done feeling like that. So please share this with someone who you think can benefit from listening to this podcast. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe, give me a 5-star. Love the number 5. It helps the podcast so much more than you may think. So whether it's Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, subscribe, give us a 5-star. I really appreciate that. I don't have my merch on today because they're all in the wash. I do have a sweatshirt of my cats, Banja and Milo, here that I got off of Etsy. Actually, my mom got it off of Etsy for me as a Christmas gift. If I'm not wearing the podcast stuff, you'll see me with Banja and Milo on my tit here because I support my cats. Anyways, if you would like to buy merch, it's on my website, www.pleaseexcusemyocd.com/merch. You can find it there. I will be changing some things up pretty soon. They're really comfy clothes. I love them. Once again, thank you so much to everyone who has joined me here today, and I will see you next week.